The literate nerds are honored to be joined this episode by the queen of cosmic horror, Mary SanGiovanni. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literate Nerds. My guest tonight, I'm very, very honored to have the queen of cosmic horror, Mary SanGiovanni. You can actually hear Mary on her own podcast, which I highly recommend, Cosmic Shenanigans. And you also have a new podcast that you're doing right now, Mare?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yes, it's called the Ghost Writers podcast, and it's with two of the members of the Horror Show with Brian Keene, Matt Wilderson and Dave Thomas, and also with author Summer Cannon. And it's fun. We have some silly and we have some serious, and we don't report the news so much like the Horror Show used to do, but we do talk about movies and books and video games and writing advice. We try to do a little bit of both so that it appeals to both readers and fans of the genre and also to writers of the genre too.
Yeah, and that's a really, really talented lineup. For those of you don't know, Dave was obviously Brian's co-host for a long time on the Horror Show. Summer Cannon is a brilliant writer. And to be honest, I mean, the Horror Show really inspired me to start doing the Literate Nerds. The first segment that I do after I, introduce the guests, I do is called Near Mint to Poor Condition, where we talk about something positive in the world of nerd news and something negative in the world of nerd news. And that is directly inspired from the work that the Horror Show with Brian Keene did for, I mean, how many years was the show on for? I know it seems so short, but it was four or 5 years,
6
right?
years, I think.
6 years.
I think
it was such a great show.
6 years. Well, thank you. I think he'd really be pleased to hear that other people are taking up the mantle of covering the news, because, to be honest, it's an important function that that our genre is informed about what's going on, and that especially if it's specifically business related, like if it's related to bad business practices of publishers or good business practices of publishers, it affects all of us. So it's important that the news is covered. But I think that a lot of the burnout for Keene had to do with covering the really heavy news news items that would come up.
There was a lot of stuff that was about there's a lot of stuff that was about people getting screwed over by employers. There was a lot of stuff that came out in the industry, obviously, about people being harassed and assaulted, in various levels. On this show, I'm a huge horror fan, so I try and focus on horror also on this show. But predominantly we talk mostly about comic books, and there's certainly problems in the comic book industry when it comes to that kind of stuff. And in the convention scene, it's, there's a reason why there's signs at every comic book convention that say cosplay cosplay is not consent.
Right.
Because you have so much of that stuff going on. But
yeah, it's disheartening. And I think comic books was, probably the first love of most of the co-hosts on the Horror Show, myself excluded, only because I really didn't know much about comics until I started dating Brian.
Yeah, and now you've got like an incredible collection of Bronze Age comics just lying around the house.
Well, it's funny. He has these long boxes full of comics that he basically collects, I guess, what he read growing up, and it's delightful, really, because there's I think once you reach a certain age, there's certain things from your childhood or your adolescence that just bring you this nostalgic joy. And it's one of the few times where Brian is completely relaxed and is just enjoying being alive. It must have been what he would have been like as a 12-year-old. Just seeing how he glows when he's looking through his comics. And I wouldn't trade that for anything for him. So if we have to dedicate a whole room to boxes and boxes of comic books, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and God bless you for saying that. I'm in the midst of going through my collection and finding the stuff that's not bagged, that needs to get bagged and boarded and organizing and stuff. And yeah, you do get this kind of nostalgia. This wonderful nostalgia joy of going through old issues and reading them. And speaking of another great podcast, I love listening to Brian and Christopher Golden, on Defenders Dialogue, because they talk about yes. They talk about some great wacky stuff. There was a lot of wacky stuff going on in that era of comic books, which is one of the reasons some of it's so much fun. So all right, now let me ask more importantly, what's the latest thing that you have coming out? I mean, you have how many novels do you have under your belt at this moment?
I'd say I just finished my 12th, and so if we're not counting short story collections and nonfiction collections, novellas, things like that, then yeah, I just finished my 12th, and that's I'm still waiting for, a definitive answer on that one. I just had a novella come out today, actually. It was a package deal with Brian through Thunderstorm Books. It's called The Shapes of Night. Oh,
I'll definitely list that in the notes for the episode so people can order it.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. It's a bit of a departure for me. I mean, it's still cosmic horror, but it's like when I was going back through it and revising it, I realized that it's a little grittier than my normal style. And I'm always curious to see what readers think of that, because I write what I guess I consider mostly quiet cosmic horror, but every once in a while I'll have a book that's just sort of like branches out into, a scene or two of extreme violence, and readers are almost like, they're almost shocked. It's almost like a my, what did she just do?
One of the things I love, like for instance, Chills, and the main character in Chills, her name is escaping me. I'm sorry.
Kathy Ryan.
Yeah. Now, not only is she a great character, an incredibly, three-dimensional character, like the whole relationship between her and her brother in that book, and I can't recommend that book enough. People go out and get it. And particularly the winter that we've had in New York, but yeah, I would say that, your style of writing has a, I want to say a smoothness, a cleanliness, like not sanitized, but like a cleanliness, a smoothness of the way you write a narrative and you present things. But then there's also like moment, like you said, there's a moment in Chill when I think it's a young couple. It's been a couple of, I read the book when it first came out. But there's a young couple trapped in a car, and one of the critters is coming after them, and it slams against the windshield, and it's running around the outside of the car. And I remember reading that because it went from like very kind of like calm, Thomas Harris style procedural, with this like feeling of overwhelming, suspense. And then suddenly you got these monsters coming out of the storm and attacking people. That book is just amazing. I mean, it really is. And Thrall is another one that I love by you, which is just so, Thrall is such a, it's such a, like an original concept. Like when I was reading it, I honestly did not know where the book was going. And then when you kind of reveal what's going on, not to give anything away, Thrall is about a guy that returns to his hometown, trying to find his ex-girlfriend, who it turns out actually has his child. and he goes there with a couple of friends of him. One is a woman who's in love with him, and that character I relate to her so much. But it turns out that this town in North Jersey is kind of like this interdimensional being that just goes from world to world and waits for people to occupy it, and then slowly builds its power and kind of just devours everything.
Right, exactly.
And it's just so surreal reading that book, but everything in it has such consistent internal logic, and that's what I love in really good horror fantasy. That the internal logic is consistent.
That one, I have to say, of all the things I've ever written, that one is my favorite. And I tend to think it's because I worked so hard on that internal logic to make sure that of all the books I've ever written, it probably took me the longest to write, because I would keep thinking of things as I was writing. I was like, oh, well, you have to explain that. You have to explain how they've been eating for the last several years if no, shipments of new food are coming in and out and things like that. Like, it was little things like that I had to work through to make sure that it didn't come out like a BS sort of structure on the concept that I was working with, But that one's my favorite one. I think of everything I've ever written, Thrall's my favorite.
Yeah, Thrall is
fun.
It's such an amazing, really. Yeah, man, that book, like, I'm like, there's just so many scenes in it that just pop out. And like, I don't want to give anything away, but there's a scene in a library that is really, really traumatic. And there's just scenes when they're walking around the town and there's this weird mist that comes in and out of the town at night that's almost like alive. And it's just so loaded with great, creepy stuff.
Thank you.
All right. So and you got new book came out today. And you just finished your 12th novel, but you're not sure when it's and now what's the best people should just go on Amazon to find your stuff, Mary? Do you have an actual website where you sell your stuff through?
I do. I have a website. It's www.marysangiovanni.com. But everything that is currently available from me, from anybody, from any publisher, is all on Amazon.
Excellent.
The new book that came out today, to be honest, now that you mention it, I haven't even looked. It's there. I think you can definitely find it through the Thunderstorm website.
And what's the title of that?
It's called The Shapes of Night.
The Shapes of Night.
It has this cool cover by Keelan Patrick Burke, actually, which I think is very creepy, and it's very evocative of the story, I think. So I'm curious to see what people think of it.
Excellent. I'm definitely gonna pick it up. All right. So I wanted to just talk briefly. As we said, the horror show with Brian Keene was really very much, the first half of it was almost always a news program. But I'm going to keep it brief tonight, because don't want to get too heavy with that crap. And I do want to move on to Literate Revisit and really talk about cosmic horror and, what cosmic horror means as an overall genre, but also all the wonderful little mini genres that appear in and around cosmic horror. But near mint, the good news this week is that it would appear that Baltimore Comic-Con, their website is up. They have announced guests. That convention is the weekend. I believe it's the third weekend in October this year. It's always the weekend after New York Comic-Con or 2 weeks after New York Comic-Con. And it is looking like there is a possibility that New York Comic-Con will happen.
That's
this
good
year as well.
I mean, I'm hoping by October, pretty much the bulk of the country will have their vaccinations, and we can maybe finally start getting a handle on this. So,
yeah, that's I'm desperately hoping for that as well. it would be really nice if Congress would, bother to